you just never know who you're going to meet along the way, do you? And that's why you have to get out and get out of your comfort zone sometimes. And,
And here, here
just,
you are, Mandy. Is it Kloppers? Is that the way to say it?
yes,
Mandy
perfect.
Kloppers from Britain,
Yes,
who
I
I
know.
first met almost 20 years ago, and now here you are, um, doing great things. So tell us about who you are, and what you do, and where you are, and
Okay, yeah,
whatever you want to say to us, because it will provoke a wonderful conversation.
cool. Well, yeah, so I was born in South Africa, but I live in near London now. I have a psychology background, but I specialized in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is more about sort of um, application, and it's a bit more
Hmm.
time limited, and a little bit more directive than typical psychotherapy. And yeah, so I've always been interested in the human condition and why we do the things we do. And I'm always looking for patterns in life, how people react to stuff. I mean, I also did sociology at university and I loved sociology. Just, just how like social media is impacting on us and how AI is going to impact on us and human nature and the things and evolution and the things that are sort of so innate in us and these clashes that we're having between our innate kind of physiology on some levels, the brainstem and the limbic system, and then the frontal cortex and all this new stuff. And it just fascinates me. So I'm into neuroscience as well, but more just reading about it and researching stuff. But yeah, and I see clients now. I have a private practice and also help the NHS. I do some consulting to do with depression, anxiety, because, well, that's grown, especially since the pandemic. Addiction is also growing. Loneliness is growing. So, in talking about leadership, I think we need it more than ever because there's a lot of lost people out there and a lot of people who are now quite isolated at home because of the internet and remote working and all of that. So, we need leaders to kind of guide us and just help us feel like we've got a sense of purpose and there's some meaning in the world, because I think there's a lot of disconnection going on.
I'm going to ask the big $1 million question. Why is all this happening? How did we find ourselves in this state? I mean,
Hmm.
we're all, I mean, we're all rather intelligent. We're highly educated. We're all motivated to do good work. How did we end up in this state where, as you described, there's all this kind of personal trauma?
Well, I have a theory, but I haven't spent too much time to researching this. But there's a theory about emotional regulation that talks about that there's three kind of
Hmm.
areas that we're in, and one is threat mode, where we're constantly in threat mode. This theory says, in terms of overcrowding, debt, fear of failure, rejection, uh, getting out of your comfort zone. All of this, there's a lot of things that create threat for us, right? So we don't want it, and that's where we have the cortisol and the adrenaline going around. So we're kind of like, oh, it's not a good state to be in. I don't want to be under threat. I feel in danger. Like there's a lion chasing me constantly. So we can go, the two ways we try to emotionally regulate is we go into drive mode, which we need because we probably would never have invented the wheel if we didn't have drive mode. So it's good. But the drive mode is what creates dopamine. And we kind of go, oh, I like that. Oh, that made me feel good. I bought a car, or I bought a house, or I got a partner, or, um, you know, there's lots of little things that can create those, exercise creates dopamine. And so we go, oh, I love that, but it's quite short lived. And we end up back in threat mode. And we're like, oh, I didn't like that. So we go back again. So that's why I think, it's good that we strive. We want more. There's a lot of people say, I'll be happy when I have the bigger house, or I have the trophy wife, or I have the whatever is this kind of job. But actually, we're kind of delaying our happiness. And often, once we get what we want, and there's a really good book, I think it's called. Oh, I'll have to come back to him, but he talks about how what we think is going to make us happy doesn't always make us happy. So there's a drive mode, right? But I think that gets overused so much, we end up kind of depleted. We keep going back and forth, and this is how addiction starts. And then there's another side to things. I think we're veering off a little bit, and that's where we get the oxytocin and the serotonin. And that is more when we're enjoying life, really stopping and thinking. We've got time with friends and family and our pets, and that creates that longer lasting happy hormone. So just in terms of that very brief kind of model, I think we're sometimes chasing the wrong things. We've got this innate need to be driven, and I think that just creates more, and we can't stop progress, can we? But are we going in the right direction with progress?
How,
What do
how
you
much
think?
how much of this is is sort of programmed into us by a culture that's so oriented around consumer culture, and is always selling us something that we need to buy or purchase or adopt or become identified with. It. I guess what I'm saying is, it seems that the world is oriented around making us feel inadequate, so that we will
Exactly.
desire things like to be happy. But if we kind of turned away from all of that, we'd realize that we're already happy. We got good things going on in our lives, and that desire for more is really a desire for more anxiety and alienation.
You're so right. That's so astute of you. I think there's a lot to be said about capitalism and and also trying to make us. I think governments sometimes they try to instill fear into us because you're more easily manipulated. And yeah, in this consumer society, we need more, we need to be better, we need to keep up with the Joneses. And then of course social media is just making that 10 times worse. And it's addictive in a way. I've also think, oh, I really my values are, quiet little place, being kind to people, simple things. But then I find myself going, oh, I wish I had a little bit more. I wish it's easy to get sucked into that. So yeah, I think sometimes it's really good to be. I think, my latest thing is a superpower is being self-aware, knowing yourself, knowing your values, and trying to stick to that and not getting too manipulated or persuaded into other things, which is so hard because we're social creatures and we want to keep up and we don't, FOMO and all of that. But yeah, I mean, it fascinates me just the things we'll do for money and how that I think that actually, like you said, it takes us away from the goal of really being happy.
I have a theory. Let,
I'd
let
love
me
to hear
let
it.
me test this theory on you, that what we desire is not happiness. What we desire is the challenge of taking on hard things and succeeding at that. And that when we say we go out and hike to the top of a mountain, we get to the mountaintop and we feel exhilarated. And we have been changed in a substantial way. But I find happiness rather fleeting. It's like
Yeah.
eating a candy bar, and oh, that gives you a rush of energy, and then all of a sudden it drops you flat. And so I think that what we need is, I hate to say it this way, but more challenge. But challenge in the right sense of, what are you going to accomplish? What are you going to participate in which brings something better to the world that you're a part of?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we need challenge. We need a sense of meaning and purpose. I find that a lot of my depressed clients that come to see me have got no sense of meaning or purpose. They're just sort of, what's the point? And where's this all going to end up? What am I doing? How am I going to leave my mark on the world? Um, and I think also something that a lot of anxious clients come to me with is intolerance of uncertainty. So it's that when we're mastering our environments, we're kind of maybe believing that we're controlling things a little bit more, perhaps. Um, and we are, I think, innately we're driven to be learning more and improving and progressing. But sometimes I wonder if we're going in the right direction, I must say. And I am generalizing here, but where you see a lot of people who are very self-absorbed. I was thinking about leadership in general and how I think the true leaders are, much better than I do on this. But my ideas would be that those that have empathy and are self-aware and are there for the greater good, not just for their own needs and their status and power, which I think some people it kind of distorts them and twists them. And I don't know what happens when people get a bit of status and money. They just see that would be good research. Like, why does that happen? That people suddenly forget. Not everybody does. There's a lot of really. What do you want to thought? Yeah, I'm curious about that. that shifts
I
people?
think, um, how do I want to enter this?
It's a big question.
Let me start by pointing people to Mark Leta's Soft White Underbelly YouTube channel. And
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah.
Mark is Mark is a um, comes out of the fashion world, photographer, videographer, and I don't remember the complete story because it's been a while since I heard it, but I think he left New York, moved back to LA, and set up a studio on Skid Row and
Oh,
started interviewing all these people who have been marginalized in society,
I
homeless
love that.
people, drug addicts, prostitutes, porn actors, all these people, former criminals, former people who had been in prison. Um, and there is a theme under that there's a thread that cuts through a lot of this, and it has to do with the quality of the families that these people lived in. And the breakdown of the family was a source of that. And so I think people are looking for the security of a healthy family. And but the systems of the world are not oriented around being family. And so what they're looking for, they can't find in the way that they think they want to have it. And so they
Yeah.
have to think differently. And but no one is thinking differently in that regard. So it's kind of this binary trap between, well, I want to be a part of a healthy family, but there are no healthy families. So what do I
Yeah.
do?
And that's sad.
It is, but but once we recognize that, then we can address it. And but
I love that.
well, where I'm coming back to is I think most of the trauma that people are experiencing is really a generational thing, something that has been given to them by generations before them, and that they're carrying it along. And I think being able to recognize that and deal with that is a part of what, people who are uh, caring professionals like yourself are doing. And I think for many people that it's essential, and they need it, but also we need it as well.
It's so true. I think we all need to feel safety, and there's very little safety in the world, and it seems to be getting worse. And interesting, I used to work at Broadmoor. I don't know if you know, it's quite a well-known prison here for mentally ill people who've committed crimes. And in those days, the men and women were still in the same location, separate wards or whatever. And I worked on a ward with about 10 females, and they'd all murdered somebody. And all of them, without exception, had had very difficult childhoods. Most of them had personality disorders, which often comes from trauma in childhood, repeated kind of complex PTSD. And it just shows how important it is that you have in an ideal world, a consistent upbringing where you feel there's an unconditional love. It's not that you're loved if you get an A, or if you're great in the sports team, but life doesn't always work like that. But yeah, I think a lot of the trauma and the dysfunction starts then, and then we end up with the societies we have. So I mean that's very simplistic, but you know what I mean.
And I think some of the people that we see as successful and the very best of us are also responding to trauma, but they've responded in a different way, and
Yes.
they've
Um,
overcome it in some way.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that actually the good side of trauma, if you can look at it that way, is that
Yeah,
sometimes it creates real fire in the belly for some
yeah.
people. It's like, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you I'm not worthless. Or so some people really turn it around. But again, I think that depends on the wiring in your brain and just your predisposition. And there's just so much to it, really. Wouldn't it be great if we had a formula? We're like, right, you do this, and maybe one day we'll have like parent factories and you know a bit mad. But no, I'm kidding. But it's just
Yeah.
how can we um, immunize the world in a way so that we do feel safer? Because when we're safer and happier, we're nicer to each other. So
So,
yeah, but
so how do you think these women that you worked with in the prison affected you? What was their? I mean, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that in order to be very good at what you do, you have to, at some level, identify with them and seek to understand on some emotional level
Mhm.
why would you commit murder, or why would you um, assault someone, or why would you do this? Why would you burn your house down? Why would you, whatever it may be? I mean, television is filled with people like this. And we see their stories and we think, well, this
Mhm.
is fiction. It's not fiction. These are real people out there. So how did how did how did this affect you as a person?
But this being quite honest in a way, but I can relate on some levels, not the murder part, obviously, but I had quite a tricky childhood, so I could relate on some of the levels, and also, I do think that, like you said, the media kind of makes criminals out to be bad, and they use the word evil and that kind of thing. But these people, I remember the one day sitting and helping one of the girls run a bath, and I was just keeping an eye on her, and we were actually having a laugh and telling each other jokes, and I mean, this is somebody who had murdered, and I did never forgot that, but they still had this human side to them where they could actually be quite sweet and kind or funny. And but it did make me think, you know, every one of them, it wasn't one thing that created that situation for them. It was a multitude of things that came together. So perhaps bad childhood, they're meeting the wrong types of people and not being guided or having the right support. And there was a lot of things that came together. So it was like a little sort of bad recipe. And if anything, it probably made me less judgmental of people,
Yeah.
because no one's perfect, and there's a lot of hypocrites out there who'll be like, "Oh, but we've all got to try and help each other out." But yeah, it was. I mean, some of the crimes were pretty horrendous. Mental health issues. Like the one girl had, she obviously was mentally ill. She'd thought that her boyfriend was going to kill her, so she'd managed to pretend they were going to have some sort of play stuff in the bedroom, and she'd handcuffed him to the bed, and then she'd basically stabbed him, and he couldn't help himself. And then she glued his eyes together and his mouth because she thought, well, then he won't be able to tell the police who did it. So there's little things like that that just you can completely mentally
No,
unwell.
there is a perfect logic to all of that, which is
Yeah,
sad. But from
yeah,
in a person who's mentally ill, the logic is
absolutely,
really clear. I'm taking
exactly.
control of my life, and you're
Yes,
no longer going to be a threat to me. I get that. And I mean, it breaks your heart that people become to that point of disintegration of their own personality, but that's really quite true.
yeah, and she was young as well, only 18 or 19, and just it looked like it. They go, oh, that you'll expect a monster, but I even don't like calling people like that monsters, because if I think it's really always good to sort of be tolerant and understand the why. It doesn't you justify, but you look what happened to you for you to be where you are, because we're more tolerant of people. Um, but you're right, that made perfect sense. And also, when people have had trauma, they don't know how to emotionally regulate. So things get on top of them really quickly, and they're just overwhelmed. And then fight, flight, freeze, whatever's going on for her was fight and gain control. Yeah.
When I was in seminary way back in the dark ages, I spent a semester doing an internship in a prison, and I would go to prison, this one prison, um, every week from about noon until about 9 o'clock at night, and I was just, in the commons areas, I was just hanging out with these guys and talking to them, and they were challenging me on, my manhood and things like that. And
Yeah.
it was all in good fun. I mean, it really was. These were not, this was a minimum security facility. And so they were probably in for their first felony conviction.
Right.
And whether they would become go further is still but I found that they were actually very easy to communicate with and talk about, and they were very open to discussing their lives. The ones that were the most difficult to deal with were the guards, and
Wow, that's interesting.
yeah, because
In what, just
because
not
they
as,
were in power and they were really kind of immune to any kind of retribution from whatever they would do.
isn't that interesting? And again, there's a human behavior lesson in there. Isn't that fascinating?
Yes, it is. It is. And and then at one point, before I went off to seminary, I was between jobs and I was asked if I would be willing, um, through the auspices of prison fellowship, to drive two federal prisoners from a federal penitentiary here in North Carolina to Washington, and they were going to be participating in a seminar for 2 weeks. So they had a work release, and one of these two guys were, one was in his 60s and he was a truck farmer, and he got mixed up with people in his community who were trafficking drugs, and he says, I wasn't doing it, but I was connected, so I
Yeah.
and then the other guy was in for mail fraud. But they were so contrite about what they had done.
Mm.
And their concern for me as a young man, I was at this point in my mid 20s. They were concerned with me, and so I dropped them off they were at this retreat center in DC, and and I spent the afternoon with them, and then I was leaving. And I'd be back in 2 weeks picking up, and they came over and took me aside as I was walking out the door. He says, "We'd really like you to stay and be with us for these 2 weeks."
Oh, that's really nice. Isn't that
It
lovely?
was, and it just opened my sense up that everyone has some part of themselves that is broken, and everybody has something there where they would like to be able to be caring and affirming of someone else.
Yes.
And how we come to bring that out of people, I think, is one of the great challenges that we face.
But yeah, I love it that you did that because that shows that you're open-minded and then you were willing to experience that. And one of my favorite sayings is if you don't like somebody, maybe you need to get to know them better. Because I mean,
I
not
like that.
doesn't mean that you're always going to like them, but you know, if we stereotypes and discrimination, all of that, and we sort of put ourselves into boxes. Well, I'm this kind of person, you're that kind of person. But actually, I'm pretty sure that if I was put into their environment or whoever, I'm just somebody that I would see as different to me. And I had to just get to know them and their lives and how they grew up and what happened to them. I think I'd probably end up making a new best friend, I imagine, all things
I
good,
wouldn't doubt
good and
it at
willing.
all.
Yeah, because I think underneath it all, we're all, I'm a bit of an idealist, but I like to believe that we all really just want to feel loved and part of something, really, ultimately. And I have this strange view sometimes that if aliens came along and they looked at our little planet and they thought we're all bickering and fighting each other, and I know it's very simplistic, but they might think, what is, what's going on? And I'd love it if we could all just kind of understand each other a bit better. But obviously, psychology says that's not going to happen because there's this us and them mentality, and when there's a lack of resources, there's going to be arguments and competition. It's just the way it is. Uh, but yeah, I think that just remembering that that person might be a lot more or have more in common with you than you realize is just always a good little background thought.
Yeah, that's very good.
Yeah.
So, so if someone came and worked with you,
Hmm.
what does that look like? What is the pattern of interaction that you develop with a client? What does that look like?
Okay. So at the moment, with private practice, people call me up and they say, I need to come and see you. And it could be for couples therapy, or it could just be because they're struggling in the world with whatever it is. Um, and the first session is usually just an orientation, kind of familiarity assessment type session. So lots of asking questions. Typical things are we talk about risk, always one of the big things. You're going to any suicidal ideation, any self harm in the past, get that out the way. And then it's just about finding out about childhoods because that often affects hugely how a person is, what their attachment styles like, what their presenting problems are, how it's manifesting, what are the blocks to progress, what are the things that would help them, and just putting together a little formulation, and then also checking on them about any past therapy and medication. Their goals for therapy is very important as well. And then with CBT, we have sort of different protocols for different disorders or illnesses or mood disorder, whatever it is. But the longer you've been doing this, the better you get at pulling different techniques from different theories and putting together a sort of a bespoke package for someone. And then what I like about CBT is that in between the sessions, there's exercises that they can do to keep that continuity going. And another thing I love about CBT, not that it's perfect and it has its limits, can be quite restrictive on some levels, but is that you get to test out some of it with behavioural experiments, we call them. So if somebody came to me with social anxiety, I'd be saying to them, okay, we're going to put a little hierarchy together from 1 to 10. And ones would be very small things, like just maybe walking past a coffee shop, not going in, just looking at it and walking past. Next 2 out of 10 might be just going in the door and looking at the menu, coming back out. There's all this graded exposure. And that's how you actually get confidence, right? You have to have a little bit of discomfort to get the confidence. And it is wonderful when you see clients just kind of have an aha moment or finally put it all together. But there are some that, really struggle and they have very sticky thoughts from childhood, or, the longer you've been dealing with something, the more those kind of neural pathways become not set in stone, but they kind of get, if you think about a road, the more you go over the tar, the deeper and more entrenched it gets, whatever. And so you have to choose different roads so that those ones can heal a bit and you make inroads into healthy habits. That's how they create good habits after 28 days or 31 days. It's lots of repetition.
Well, that touches on part of the questions I have, is that it seems like for most of us, we need to find that moment of change, that transition point where we can identify as, I'm now different than I was 15 minutes ago. Because
Yes.
something has taken place inside of me and I recognize it, I feel it, it's something that's embodied. I'm now different.
Mm-hmm.
But then the question is, how do I sustain this? How do I not fall backwards? And I think that's a larger question than simply how do I change? And so I want to take that little nugget there and add it into, how does this affect groups like a business or a family? Because I think my reason for saying that is that for 10 years I had an office in a house with 5 psychotherapists,
Oh, wow. Okay.
each having a different type of practice, and one of them was practicing what you're doing, and we would have lunch every month, and we would talk about our cases, and
Oh, fascinating.
I'm doing group things. I'm doing business consulting, and what I saw was the issues that they were dealing with as individual clients were the same issues that I was dealing with large groups of people in an organization, and that organizations are just individuals writ large, and so I'm curious about, so how, when I'm coming back to my original question, so how do we sustain the change, and how do we sustain the growth, particularly when it's going to have to involve other people who are a part of our lives?
Yes, it is the tricky part because basically you have to be quite disciplined and keep up those small changes. It doesn't have to be a big lifestyle change. It's little things that you keep doing, those micro habits that eventually become part of who you are, but you've got to keep repeating them. So when I say to somebody, try do something differently, or reframing a thought, or the grounding techniques that I teach people when they're really anxious, it's something that you have to try and incorporate. It's like I say, a healthy diet. You can have 2 or 3 days of really good food, but it's not going to make much difference if you don't try to keep that up. And obviously we're human, so you've got to allow for error, and mistakes, and not beat yourself up, because I think self-compassion is really important in keeping things going as well, so that you don't go, oh, well, it was all a waste of time and just I'm going to go back to my old ways, which some people do as well, through rigid black and white thinking. So it's about I'm a work in progress and I'm doing every little small thing that I can. Some days not going to be as up to the task as normal, but it's about setting yourself some small short-term goals, some long-term goals, and then a lot of self-reflection and making sure that you kind of stop and check on your progress and put in place support. So if you need to see somebody regularly or have coaching or things like that. But yeah, you can't, you've got to kind of keep it going till it becomes wired into your brain in a way. And the research says that takes up to 30 or 32 days to keep at something. That's the latest research. Because rewiring your brain takes time. It takes thinking differently. I think of rewiring your brain as like a field of grass, and you've got your little shortcut on the way home, and you go all that way. But maybe that's an unhealthy shortcut, let's say. So therapy will say you've got to try not go that way anymore. I know it's quick and easy, but it doesn't, it's near where the crocodiles are, or it's not good for you. So you've got to try and go that way instead, where the tall grass is. And at first it's like, oh, this is hard work, I don't know where I'm going, and it's really kind of getting me down. But if you just keep at it over a few days and weeks, you will eventually wear that down a path and it'll be quicker. And that's kind of like the brain. You got to really kind of toughen it out in the beginning, because like, oh, it's just is exhausting. And eventually, but that's kind of how it works.
Well, in a sense, I guess you have to figure out what is it that triggers those bad behaviors. And
That's yeah. We all have escape behaviors, that dopamine drive thing that
yeah,
we want to self-soothe. When we soothe, we feel a bit better, right? So that could be eating a donut. That's one of mine. I love donuts. And but I know I shouldn't, and I don't do them very often, but I think, oh, I've broken my habits today. But that's how we self-soothe. Some people gamble, some people get sex addiction. I've had those sorts of clients. We all have our things that make us feel like, oh, I feel kind of soothed, but it's that short-lived process that
right.
keeps us going back for more. Um, and so you've got to try and find healthy ways to heal and self-soothe. Uh, and this is a constant balance, right? Because our brains just want more and more. And I think the more dopamine you get, the more you're going to need the next time around, over time. And that therein is what addiction is, basically. It's just needing more and more to feel that buzz, that kind of happy feeling. So yeah, we've got to work on that. I think there's a lot of research going into that, into how to make us feel safe without all the escape behaviors or the avoidant behaviors.
I know you're not a physician, so I'm not asking for a physician's opinion on this, but there are a lot of people who are using various um, medical things,
Yes.
hallucinogenics and things like that, plant things. I've had this conversation with others, and as a vehicle for reorienting their brain and seeing things differently.
Hmm.
What's your experience with that? What have you and I don't I'm curious as to what you think about that whole world.
Yeah, I'm quite open-minded about it. I think there's a lot of new ways that we can do things. There's a lot of talk about TMI. I'm trying to think what the word. It's sort of stimulating the brain, transcranial magnetic stimulation. That was it.
Hmm.
TMS. And then there's also the hallucinogenic psychedelics. And there's a lot of talk about it working. And I can't remember, I was talking to recently, and they said that they'd tried this. It was through somebody they knew in London, and because of their position as a journalist or something, they got to try this therapy, which was kind of hallucinogenics or some kind of mix. And they apparently were amazing after that. So I'm very open-minded. I'm open-minded to anything that's new, and I think we should be open-minded and not just immediately dismiss things, because I think that's just that too black and white, and we could miss really important things. But I'm definitely open-minded to new ways to deal with things.
Well, I've known people who have used those, and I can't tell whether they're positive about it because
Uh,
I feel like they should be positive about it or whether it really worked. I don't know. I mean,
okay, that's it.
I
Yeah.
just don't have a sixth sense about that.
Yeah.
It's not something I'm interested in. I like being very clear-headed and not
Yeah, I
wandering
get
off
it.
into
I,
space.
I mean, I'm fascinated as well about mushrooms. You know, there's microdosing of mushrooms and stuff, but you can't get any of that sort of stuff here in the UK. They're very strict. I'm fascinated. I think that there's something in it, you know, plant-based. I could, you know, I just think we should look at everything. And there's lots of ways to treat mental illness, and I get cross that physical health often gets more funding and more focus than mental health. But if somebody had to say to you, you know, if you had to choose to lose a limb or your mind, what would you rather lose? Most people go, I'd rather lose, I mean, terrible choice to make, but most people would rather lose a limb than their mind, right? So I wish we
Absolutely.
had put more emphasis on treating mental illness, and it's becoming a, you know, it's always been an issue, right? And I think we live in a world that's not suited to the natural human state, really. I think that technology has sped up far quicker than the human physiology, and our evolutionary process is speeding up. So I wonder sometimes about
Well,
whether that in
I can
itself is
give you
creating mental
I
illness.
can give you a personal experience of that.
Okay.
4 years ago, I was on a trip and I woke up the next morning. I was in a hotel, woke up the next morning, and I had lost hearing in this ear
Oh,
just overnight. I mean, I had it and
that's
then it was
scary.
gone. And I looked it up and I found that there was a thing called sudden hearing loss, and it's diagnosed.
Wow.
And and I won't go into the whole story of it because it's a series of things. But it turned out that I had a what they call an acoustic neuroma, which is a tumor that had attached itself to my vestibular nerve. So not only had I lost hearing, but I had lost balance on the right side of my head.
That's, oh, balance, of course, yeah. So had you noticed any balance issues up until that point?
No, no
Gee, so
balance
was that
other
sudden?
than just constantly being clumsy all my life.
Me too.
But what happened was this thing happened, early September and then early October as I was preparing to go have my first visit with an ENT. I was next door at my neighbor's house and I stood up to walk home and I was hit with vertigo. And that's when the balance issue started, and things are going in front of me like this, and
You must have been very stressed out. Like, what is,
well, not I was stressed in that moment because I needed to make I had to walk home. I had to walk back to my house and walk in the front door
oh,
and
so
then
sudden?
I got medication and so the vertigo was handled, but the balance issues remain. And it meant that I could no longer ride my bike. It's very difficult to walk on trails in the woods, things like that, because um, there's just
Gosh,
but this is where I'm taking with this. Okay. So I have to be willing to give up that part of my life, but the part of my life which remains is still very vital and I will live with this with the rest of my life and I fully intend to live past 100. So
yes,
I think that part of what you're dealing with in helping people address their problems and address their life situation from the cognitive therapy approach means that people can adapt. I mean, this is really what
mm,
I think that people have a difficult time doing, but they can adapt and they can change. And they don't have to change everything, but they can change enough so that now they can manage a new situation that they're in. And
yeah. People
and
are amazingly good at adapting, though.
when they're forced to.
Yes, yes, because we
And
want to
so
stay safe.
what I'm suggesting is that you need to adapt before you're forced to do it. And which is constantly learning, constantly changing, constantly learning new things. I mean, there are things that I have not done in my life that I'd like to do. I'd like to learn to play the piano, and I'd like to learn to speak Gaelic, and all these things. But am I going to be able to do that? I don't know if I have time to do that.
Oh,
But
I like it that you've got plans. A friend of mine actually has just started up an app where you can learn a language in 2 weeks. Apparently, psych stuff behind it. So yeah,
well,
maybe I should get you a copy. Find out. But I think the pandemic made me realize just how adaptable people are really, because that was quite a change for everybody, and then people were trying to find ways to fill their time productively and doing things differently. And I just thought, wow, actually, we're a lot more resilient than
yes.
I'd actually probably given us all credit for.
Oh,
So
I totally agree. So here's my last question. And I often ask this of my guests because and for some of them it's a question they've not thought of, but I'm sure you have. Where do you find hope for the future? And do you have hope for the future of the world and of people? And I assume you are. I mean, you do because I just know you enough to know that. But where do you find that? What is it that is um, that that makes you hopeful for the world that we live in?
I make a point of trying to look for warmth and kindness in the world. And I think when I was younger, maybe because of my childhood, I had a very kind of negative bias towards people, and I was like, people are bad and people are mean, and you're going to get that. And there are people that are mean and bad, and all sorts of reasons why they're like that. But I make a point now of focusing on good stories where it can just be like something small, like somebody helping somebody else across the road. Or the one day I was driving to work and I saw a lady really playing and laughing with her dog and throwing the ball for her dog, and she looked really happy, and the dog looked really happy. And I thought, now there's a good, I think people who care for animals are lovely people because they don't have to, and there's that warmth and that care for something else to look after it, and I love that. Um, and and I try to be, I don't always get it right, but I try, like, helping somebody in the queue. If they don't have enough money, I'll give them some money, and uh, complimenting a stranger in a supermarket or whatever. And when I see other people doing that, and I look for it, I look for those stories, and just kindness where it doesn't need to be given, but it is given. And there's a lot of that out there. And and you know what else? It's a strange way of looking at the world, but I think, but when I think about strangers and trying to believe that they're good, if you think about it, I like these forensic channels sometimes, and I watch them also for this, not for the gore, but for the psychology of behind what gets people to that level where things go wrong. And there's a lot of stories where somebody has a heart attack or something goes wrong, and they have to rely on pure strangers to be with them in those most awful, scary moments of their life. And often people are really helpful and they want to help, and they don't just go, oh, there are circumstances where that happens. But so I like to believe that most people would do the right thing, and that there's a lot of good, kind people. Whereas before, my general view was people are just,
Yeah.
was now there's a lot of lovely, lovely people out there, and they, when given a chance, they'll show that warmth and that care, and that keeps me going. It's the little things that keep my faith going. And I see a lot of kindness in the young people now, like the Gen Zs and the millennials. Well, quite young, still millennial, but there's kindness.
Say something about that because I'm very keyed into the Gen Z generation. I really care about them and love my interactions with them. So what do you see? What do you see for them going forward?
I think they've got a hard world to, there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of comparison. You can't get away from the information overload. That's why I think digital detox is important. But I think they've got, uh, give them a lot more credit than they do. I think they've got their heads screwed on right. They've got the right values. Most of them are very astute, actually clever. Care about the planet, care about what's happening in their countries, a lot more than I realized. So I think they've got a good bunch of people who are fighting for the right things and who are actually quite caring
Uh-huh.
in spite of everything. So
I have begun to put together a novel about Gen Zs.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Well, we'll wait and see. But what two things that I see. One is that they lack a foundational identity.
That is true.
And so they're asking questions. Um, the working title of the book is Answers to Questions Never Asked.
Oh, I love that.
And
What?
they are given all these answers, all this information, but they've never been asked what they really are interested in. And every Gen Z that I've shared that title with, they say, "Oh yeah, that's exactly the way it is."
That is fabulous. Oh, please, I need a copy of that book because I think there's a lot to be said for the world they've grown up in and having the internet and uh, yeah, just a very different way to and just having that access all the time, whereas we had lots of time out, right?
Yes.
Oh, that's such a great project. I'm very excited about that. You're gonna have to keep me up to date. I love the idea of that.
Well, I have to figure out how to make it work, and I have to figure out how to write a novel. I'm used to writing nonfiction, so
Well, if I can help you with any of that, not that I'm busy writing a book as well in the background. It's kind of kids book this time around, but
well, let me see. One of my goals is I'd like to interview more Gen Zs,
okay.
and I've interviewed a few. But those that I've interviewed probably don't self-identify as any kind of generational thing. They're others.
Hmm. Yeah,
But
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
really interested in talking to them, and and there's a generational gap here between me. I'm 72 years old, and them when they're 21 or 23 or whatever, that seems to be insurmountable.
Yeah,
But it isn't. It isn't because I I I take the attitude that I am here to learn from you. You have something to
that's
share with
great.
me. I want to be influenced by you so that I have a better grasp of the world we live in.
That is one thing I love about your mind, Ed, is that you're a curious person and you're always discovering. And I remember that from a long time ago. You love to learn and you're curious and you're open-minded, and I love that. You're very
Yeah.
open to new things, and that I wish more people weren't just oh, that'll never work, or just shutting stuff down. I love how oh, let's take a look at this. Okay. I love that.
Thank you,
I might
Mandy.
know some Gen Zers who'd be quite happy to chat to you, but I don't know if you're doing it just an American view or global view but
It's just a view. It's just a view. I think that's you see, I'm not being critical, but defining it as European or American, that's they don't think in those
true.
terms.
Actually, that's true. I suppose I was just thinking about cultural differences. Slightly might be slightly different, but no,
But there's
okay.
kind of a uniculture that we find for this through social media
Mm,
that they're either embracing or they're pushing back against. But
yeah.
it's the same culture. And it,
I would be fascinated to read that. It would be so interesting.
well, um, okay, I won't say anything more. I have to
I'm
figure
going to
that
nag
thing
you
out.
now.
Well,
I'm
it's
kidding.
working in my head. The question is how do you create um, that moment of conflict which draws people into the story
Hmm.
and um, it's more than some kind of thought in one's mind. Who am I? And that's not a sufficient enough conflict to draw people into a story that's in a novel form. So I have
Real
to,
life stories. People love real life stories. So if you could tell, how certain things have affected people.
well, I'm working on a real life story for the protagonist, a young man. Uh,
Oh, this sounds amazing.
so I'll say more at another time.
Yeah, but that to me, it really piques my interest. I think I'm very excited about that. I think that'll do really well.
I will send you some of the things that I've written so far, and I'd
That'd be
love to
amazing.
hear what you think. And
I'd
I'm
love
really
that. And
glad.
tons of colleagues who'd also want to read it because it's fascinating. You know, that's the sort of thing we lap up. We're like, oh, so exciting, so interesting.
I know you live in the UK, but where in the UK are you?
In Surrey, it's about half an hour from London. It's down the town I'm closest to is called Guildford.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
So
Well,
yeah.
maybe I'll come to the UK and we'll have a
Oh, that'd be
gathering
great. We
and
could
have
have a writers' conference. Yes.
uh, I could do that. That would be fun. Okay, we'll talk more about that.
Yeah. No,
I'm
I'm
really,
gonna.
I'm really glad to reconnect with you. Thank you, and for being here. And it's been a treat, a joy, and I wish you well in your endeavors in the future. I wish you every success with your clients because
Oh,
they
thanks.
they need you. And I
Thank you.
thank
And
you
you
all for
too.
watching. Thank you all for
And you.
watching. Yes. Go. I'm sorry. I
Sorry,
interrupted.
no, me. I interrupted. And you just keep doing what you're doing. I love your work. I love where you share information and your curious mind. And so we need people like you. It's inspirational.
Thank you, Mandy. And thank you all for watching. And we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.